Welcome to a little bit of fun in the lab, networking with Fish Style. We're going to go ahead and continue on with the CyberFlood series. Today we're going to talk about, in CyberFlood tests, you have the test duration for that test, and you also have the load specification for that test. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go ahead and discuss duration and load specification. And we're also going to go into CyberFlood itself and look at the varying default test templates and what their default starter duration is and what their default load specification is. Then we're going to start a brand new CyberFlood test from scratch. And then we're going to try to change the duration of the test to 1 minute and 30 seconds. This is not going to work, so we'll discuss what happened. And then we'll do my usual tweaking, modify idles and ramps, ramp ups and ramp downs so I can get to 1 minute and 30 seconds. So what we're supposed to do first is discuss duration and load specification. So duration, not that hard to figure out. Duration is the length, 6 minutes and 30 seconds, of how long when I click go in the CyberFlood test, how long that test is supposed to run. Load specification seems that it is only what load I'm supposed to have, which would be something like bandwidth. So if you've watched some of the other videos so far, I've used bandwidth and I've also used simulated users. So the load specification, one would think, is just whether it's bandwidth, connections per second, simulated users, whatever. Now, if we clicked on this pencil in load specification, what we would actually get to is the load specification editor, which I do admit I play a lot in. So you have the load type here. For us, again, it was bandwidth, and we have 20 seconds of idle period, and then we have a minute of ramping up. As you can see, it's like we're supposed to ramp up to 6, then have a steady state of 3 minutes, ramp down, and then for 1 minute and 10 seconds, how do I know it's 1 minute and 10 seconds of this blue line right here? And that's because of the fact that the duration over here is listed as 6 minutes and 30 seconds. So this over here is going to end at 6 minutes and 30 seconds. So this is our duration, and then the load, which is the length of the test, and then the load specification, which is what load, at what starting time, at what ending time. Is it supposed to be steady state, ramping up, ramping down, or what? I admit I'm not going to go into all of the different reasons why you might have that idle in the beginning and idle at the end. That would be for a different YouTube. I'm just going to say that I've been using layer 437 traffic generators for a long time, starting back in the day with the Spirent Web Avalanche Web Reflector. And it's very common to have these 5 different phases during this type of test. So idle, ramp up, steady state, ramp down, idle. And that's what it is here. We have 20 seconds of idle time, 1 minute of ramp up time, 3 minutes of steady state being at 6 gig. 1 minute of ramp down, and then 1 minute and 10 seconds of idle time. So idle time, ramp up, ramp down, steady state. Now what we're supposed to do now is we're supposed to go ahead and go into CyberFlood and review the varying CyberFlood default test templates. So if we come over here and you go to Test Builder is kind of sort of like starter little test templates that Spirent built for you in the CyberFlood. Performance, HTTP throughput, max HTTP throughput, throughput with mixed traffic. All of these are, spoiler alert, going to have in the load specification bandwidth. So these are all what we would refer to as bandwidth tests. The big 3 are typically bandwidth. Open connections are also concurrent connections. How many connections do you have open concurrently at the same time? And then also connections per second. So bandwidth, BW, CC, concurrent connections, CPS, connections per second. So throughput, bandwidth, throughput, bandwidth, throughput, bandwidth, open connections, that's the CC one, the concurrent connections, CPS. Now, again, that's the interesting thing, right? So when you see a bandwidth test, there's 3 of them right here. And you can also do whatever you want, but they're all still bandwidth tests. So I think sometimes people think, oh, there's just one bandwidth test. No, there's not, right? So HTTP throughput. So if we come here, what we see here is we see that for HTTP throughput, when Spirent built this for you, they kind of sort of had stuff down here and things like that that they thought you'd probably want or start with, right? So duration is 10 minutes. Bandwidth is 10 gig. And then if we actually look down here, they're doing HTTP 1.1 and it's a get and it's reset. So it's 10 minutes, 10 gig, HTTP 1.1, it's a get right here, and connection termination is a reset. Now, if we go ahead and pick max HTTP throughput, so max HTTP throughput is duration 10 minutes. This load specification is very interesting. It's bidirectional bandwidth at 19.3. I thought that was very random. But anyway, bidirectional bandwidth, 19.3. It's a HTTP 1.1. The client method is it's going for a post. So the previous one was doing a get. This one's doing a post. So again, you hear bandwidth, but as you can see, it's not one size fits all, and we tweak these things. Let's go over to throughput with mixed traffic. So throughput with mixed traffic is still throughput. It's still a bandwidth test. So their default is 6 minutes, 30 seconds, bandwidth 6 gig. And then here it's a whole bunch of different applications with different types of percentage breakdowns. And this is the one that you've seen so far in all of the different tests that I've done, where I have like a traffic mix and then I have a security mix. I kind of like this one because if I want to go ahead and just make it all HTTP, I can, but I have a nice starter. So this is the one that I tend to do. Now, those are the 3 bandwidth tests, and you saw how different they were. HTTP 1.0, HTTP 1.1, one was a get, one was a put, one is mixed traffic here, but all 3 of these are bandwidth tests. Now, if we come down here, these are referred to as capacity tests. So this is open connections per second, connections per second. So let's go to open connections. So this is HTTP open connections, how many connections you have open at the same time, or what is also referred to as concurrent connections, CC. So this is 15 minutes, and as you can see, it's trying to go for 11 million. Now, if we come down here, when Spirent built this, they had it HTTP 1.1. They had it as a get, and then they have the server doing an RST or a reset. Now let's go ahead and come over here and look at max HTTP connections per second. So for max HTTP connections per second, I found this one really interesting, and I'm really glad that they did this because if you're really going for max HTTP connections per second, they did 10 minutes. Load specification is connections per second, and you're trying to get to 1 million connections per second here. This is HTTP 1.0. SYN, SYNAC, ACK, GET, teardown. Move on. It's like speed dialing. Okay, so that's great for max HTTP connections per second test. Go, go. And the TCP method is a close on this. So, sometimes you would actually, so if you do a FIN, they have to act the FIN. If you just send an RST, then forget about it, man. And so that's one less thing that you have to send, so even faster speed dialing. So let's see, this is 1 million connections per second, 1.0, get, and RST. Yep, okay. So now let's go down to HTTP connections per second. So HTTP connections per second, and this wasn't trying to do a max. It's like, okay, go ahead and start here. We're not trying to do max HTTP, so yeah, go ahead and use 1.1, use a get, and then maybe start off with connections per second of like 192K. And you can tweak all this stuff in here. So what you've seen so far is you saw in my other videos, I had some things that were low specification of simulated users. Now you've seen bandwidth testing. You also saw how many open connections I have, and then connections per second. Now, if we had gone to DNS, again, it all depends on what you're doing. If we had gone to DNS, the load specification would have been queries per second. So what your duration is, and a 5-minute duration. So what your duration is and what your load specification is and what you do and when you do it, and also how all this is done, is given to you as a starter template by Spirent, and then you tweak it. So let's go ahead and go over here. So we reviewed the variant CyberFlood test templates, and what we saw that for the bandwidth tests, HTTP throughput was 10 minutes, 10 gig. It was a 1.1 get. For max HTTP throughput, 10 minutes. It was a bidirectional bandwidth, 19.3 gig. HTTP 1.1 post. The throughput with mixed traffic, 6 minutes, 30 seconds. The bandwidth, 6 gigs, and mixed traffic. Now, again, these are just the starter templates. I always tweak them, regardless of what it is here that I'm tweaking. For the other tests, it was HTTP open connections. That was a duration of 15 minutes in their template starter. Open connections at 11 million. Max HTTP connections per second was 10 minutes. Connections per second was 1 million. And for max HTTP connections per second, they, of course, are doing HTTP 1.0. They're doing gets. They're doing resets. And I forgot to point out that they're also doing piggyback gets. So that's even more efficient. So, and then HTTP connections per second, 10 minutes connections per second. Default for what they have there for you is 192K, and that's doing HTTP 1.1. So the next thing we're supposed to do is go over to the CyberFlood and create a new test from scratch. And then I'm supposed to try to change the duration of the test to 1 minute 30 seconds and discuss why this is not going to happen. So let's go ahead and go back over here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pick the one that I always do, which is, well, I typically do in my little starter stuff. So, and we're going to come over here and find my subnets, put a client subnet here, server subnet over here. Oh, I forgot my test queue. Test queue. And then come down here to my VRs, drop you in, and drop you in. And I don't really have to do this because we weren't going to run it, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway. Clients and servers. So we'll do a save, duration, and load fun, and save. Now, what I'm supposed to do now is I'm supposed to go ahead and come here and try to change the duration to 1 minute and 30 seconds. And as you can see there, I can't do that. The test duration must be 3 minutes and 30 seconds or more to support the current load specification settings. So these are in tandem with each other. So let's go ahead and talk about why that's happening. So we had 6 minutes and 30 seconds, and the load specification was 6 gig. So again, it's not just, 6 gig. It's the whole breakdown. Because what happens is that I'm actually really doing this. I have 20 seconds of idle. I have a minute of ramp up. I have 3 minutes of steady state, a minute of ramp down, and then a minute and 10 seconds of idle again. So what I need you to understand is that if you go up or down in duration, if you change that duration value that is added to or subtracted from only one of those 5 categories in there, and that's steady state, the idle times will be left alone, untouched. So no matter what you do there, the idle times will be left in duration. The idle times will be left alone. The ramp up and ramp down times will be left alone. So as you can see, we only have 3 minutes of steady state. So if I only have 3 minutes, whoops-a-daisy, if I only have 3 minutes of steady state, I can't go down 5 minutes. Going from 6 minutes and 30 seconds down to 1 minute and 30 seconds is 5 minutes. I can actually only go down by 3 minutes. Let's look at that. So it's easier to go up, right? So this is our duration, 6 minutes, 30 seconds. And this is what our load specification is and at what time we're supposed to be doing what. So if we go up by 3 minutes in duration, if we go from 6 minutes, 30 seconds and we add 3 minutes to it, gets us to 9 minutes and 30 seconds. Our idle time is still 20 seconds. Our ramp up time is still 1 minute. Our idle time on the other side is still 1 minute, 10 seconds. Our ramp down is still 1 minute. So the 3 minutes got added to steady state. Our steady state before was 3 minutes. Our steady state now is 6 minutes. Let's say we went down 3 minutes. So if we went down 3 minutes, which gets us to the 3 minutes and 30 seconds that it said you had to have at least 3 minutes and 30 seconds. You'll see why now. So if we go down by 3 minutes, we go from 6 minutes, 30 seconds to 3 minutes, 30 seconds. And our idle time, the 20 seconds, stays the same. Our ramp up time, 1 minute, stayed the same. Our ramp down time of 1 minute stayed the same. And our idle time of 1 minute and 10 seconds also stayed the same. We had a steady state of 3 minutes. We took away 3 minutes from the duration. We have no steady state. But that's what you configured. So the thing is, before, you tried to go down by 5 minutes. So from going from 6 minutes and 30 seconds, trying to go down to 1 minute and 30 seconds, you can't do that because the steady state is only 3 minutes. And when you change the duration, we only add or subtract that time having to do with steady state. So we only change the time of steady state, nothing else. So what we're supposed to do now is we're supposed to go ahead and go into CyberFlood and do my usual tweaking and modify the idles and the ramp so I can get to 1 minute and 30 seconds. So let's go ahead and go back over here. So we're going to change this back to 6 minutes, and I'm going to come in here. And what I'm going to do is I really do not care about 1 minute and 10 seconds of idle at the end. So I just go ahead and drag it all over towards the end. And what I'm doing is not really that exciting. It's not that I need to stop at 6:22. I do drag this all the way over to 6:30. I don't really want, so we'll do like a 4-second idle and then do this. Now, I'm not married to where I put these dots. This dot at the end goes right to the end. This dot over here, whatever. So this is what I do, okay? So I have like very little idle, I ramp up, very little at the end, and then I ramp down. And then I go ahead and I come in here, and now I can go ahead and change it to, what did I say, 1:30? Yeah, okay, 1:30. And now I can go ahead and change it to 1:30. Now, when I change it to 1:30, as you can see, we are now at 1:30. Now, I only give it 4 seconds of idle, and then I ramp up. I'm not trying to hit it with a bunch of stuff right now, but for me, this is a good starter. I don't want to run 10 minutes. I don't want to run 15 minutes. I'm in a lab environment. I just want to go ahead and make sure that my stuff is working. I've cabled everything up right. I put the right IP addresses on and everything. So I'm probably going to go ahead and start simple at first, and then I will deal with everything else later. So that's about it. I think we covered everything with the duration and the load specification, and also how with the different templates you would have different starting points. And then also even looking at the DNS one to say that that's, the queries per second. So it's yet another type of load. Yeah, that's it. Have tons of fun with CyberFlood, and I'm out. See ya.